Florence, and my speech is going to be about abortion. Um, Abortion causes significant social harms. From the moment of conception, the fetus is a human being. It is created with a unique genetic identity that remains throughout the person's life. From that moment, human life begins. A French geneticist, Jérôme Lejeune, known by recognizing Down syndrome, said, "To accept the fact that after fertilization has taken place, a new human has come into being is no longer a matter of taste and or opinion. The human nature of a human being from conception to old age is not a metaphysical connection, it's a plain experimental evidence." I know this topic is very difficult to talk about. It is difficult to hear and to speak about, but it is a contemporary problem that society is actually and currently going through. Now, the real problem we face is the argument that a baby is just a fetus. It is a tissue, and yet not a human being. And that is up to the mom to determine what happens with the tissue. In some abortion facilities, they select some mothers and they carefully rip out the tissue because some of their organs have value, and they sell them for research. It is a contradictory thing to say that at one moment it is not a human, but when it comes to selling it for research, it suddenly is. It's a human all the way through the process. But how can this business take place if the unborn baby is considered a human by the United States government? The Federal Unborn Victims of Violence Act was created to protect unborn children from assault and murder. Now, at least 38 states have passed similar laws. Since it has been proved that during this process, the babies go through pain. Bernard Nathanson, who was an abortion doctor and now has become a pro-life activist, said, "We see in that ultrasound that the child's mouth open in a silent scream. This is the silent scream of a child threatened immediately with extinction." As well, Marine Condic, professor of neurology and anatomy of the University of Utah, said, their most primitive response to pain is the spinal flex, which is developed at 8 weeks of gestation. However, not only the life of the fetus is running through danger, since abortion may lead to a future medical problem for the mother. A study published by the International Journal of Epidemiology states that about 15% of the first trimester miscarriages are because of prior history of abortion. The journal states, induced abortion by vacuum aspiration is associated with the increased risk of first trimester miscarriages in the subsequent pregnancy. Also, a study of Indian Journal of Cancer found an association between breast cancer and the history of abortion. The risk increased as the number of abortions practiced increased. I can tell you that each one of us in this room was once 20 weeks old in the womb of your mother, and that we can look at each other and hear each other and understand that the difference between that child and us right now is time. Maybe we should start asking ourselves a basic question. If that's a real human being that we're talking about, and this country's declaration states that every person has to live and to pursuit of happiness, then do we truly believe in what we say to defend? Thank you.
Florence, I think that you kind of step on the purpose statement, or excuse me, the propositional statement here a little bit. You do say what your point is, but I think that you need a little bit more lead into it. It's practically the first thing out of your mouth, and I think that there's a lot of information that you could give us a context on, explain why this controversy exists, maybe give us a little bit of background on the issues that motivate people to see it differently than the way you do, so that we have some, like I said, some context for the argument, and then make the argument. The notion that abortion has significant harms to society, 90% of what you talk about concerns the issue of whether it is life, and that is also an issue of fact. Since that's what your main focus would be, I would say that that should be the way that you develop this argument, instead of worrying about what the side effects of abortion are, which is kind of in the second point of your argument. The second point seems largely irrelevant to the first point if your whole first point is focused on that we are violating a life here, which is one of the main problems with the argument, is that it ends up dancing very closely and across the line several times as a value argument. You kind of finish with a value argument. As a matter of fact, your whole exit line about, we've got to start asking ourselves, do we really believe in what we say? Well, that is in fact a value argument, suggesting that we don't believe those kinds of things, and that we are being hypocritical in some way, which is not necessarily inappropriate to argue, but it's not for this particular assignment since we're dealing with a factual issue. So what you need to do is establish that there is a dispute over what constitutes a life, or at least a protected life, in the early stages of pregnancy, and then tell us by your definition why this life exists from the moment of fertilization, which I think you do that very well, and why any exceptions that people try to carve out are problematic. And you get a little bit of that. I like the example of the Unborn Victims Act as an illustration of those kinds of problems that people would be faced with. There's not a preview of what the supporting structure is going to be. There's not really any structure for the opening section, where there's a lot of information presented on the nature of the humanness or the humanity of a fetus, which I did appreciate. The information about the body parts being sold, not being human. I'm not sure that people assume that it's not human. The dispute there probably has more to do with whether or not it's a protected life, and you kind of dodge the issue of the legal question and instead try to focus on the scientific question. I'm not sure. I kind of understand the position that you're taking. Genetically, it's a human being, but is genetics enough? Is that sufficient for us to establish that something is entitled to legal rights? And that's, I think, where the other side would be having their dispute. That's where the controversy is from their point of view. And so I think you need to engage in that a little bit more. The stuff that you present on potential risks to mothers subsequent to having abortions, or the other kinds of issues that they might be faced from having abortions, breast cancer, future miscarriages, that's a different kind of argument. It does fit under the general proposition that you have, but since, 2/3 of your speech time was devoted to the other, and this is a very small part, and there's nothing else in it, it feels a little bit like an afterthought. Either it should be expanded a little bit more, and the two parts should be emphasized as co-equal parts of your argument, or you should just kind of stick to the other argument and find the disputes on definition of life to develop a little bit there. Like I said, I like the testimony evidence that you had on the first point. There's a lot of objective criteria that you're trying to apply there. There's not any statistical information, but you do present your sources for the most part. All right. Thank you.